The weekly sermons of 45th Street Baptist Church are now available as a podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. The weekly sermons of 45th Street Baptist Church are now available as a podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you know how powerful this is? Do you know what it means in your life? Or maybe I should ask the question, does it mean anything in your life? Until you learn how to study it and see what God is saying to you, you'll never really be able to fulfill your purpose. Come on and join us. Join us for 45 minutes of purpose here at 45th Street Baptist Church. I guarantee you, you'll come out thinking differently. And my prayer is, somewhere along the line, you'll find the purpose that God has for you. Come on in and join us.
Welcome to 45 Minutes of Purpose with Reverend Andra D. Sparks.
All right. I'm glad this technology kind of gives us direction. It can tell when you're talking and it's still on mute. So it tells you to take it off mute. All right. Again, I'm glad to be here. For those of you who are here and those of you who are on the stream, we're glad to have you with us tonight. We're excited because we're starting a new Bible study this evening. It's a Bible study that was selected by majority vote. We've done that from time to time over the years, giving everyone a voice when there hadn't been something that's been beating me up to teach. Um, and this time it came out of the choices that were given. The choice was a Bible study entitled Being the Church. Being the Church. Being the Church. And it's simply a Bible study about what the church is about. What the church is about. What are we supposed to be doing? What are we doing right? What are we not doing right? And tonight we're going to start out talking about the purpose of a church. And what better place to go and talk about that than to go to Saddleback, California, and look at the model that was started there by Rick Warren and his purpose-driven church. He has taught many pastors in many churches across the country, around the world, really, on the principles that he established. The church out there was started in 1980. And since then, that church averages about 15,000 members a week in attendance. But that's not important to Rick Warren. Rick Warren is a pretty everyday kind of guy. But the way the church was developed out in that California area was appealing to a lot of people because it got away from some of the traditional methods that we use in attracting people to church, some of the traditional things that have been going on for years. You wouldn't find in Saddleback at that church. You would not find a whole lot of ties when they go to church. You wouldn't find a whole lot of business wear. It's very laid back, very casual, and that's attractive to a lot of people, but not to everybody. Not to everybody. And so we're going to talk about those kinds of things. We're going to talk about the principles that go into a church, regardless of method of delivery of the theological principles. We're going to talk about how people feel comfortable in church, what draws people to church. We're going to talk about how you sustain the membership. One thing we'll find is that in your handout, you got a pretty significant write-up on who Rick Warren is and how he went about starting Saddleback. And I certainly urge you to make sure you read that. You'll get an article with each one of these lessons we go through. But one thing you'll find is that there are types of churches, and Saddleback is a seeker-friendly church. Seeker, you looking, you want to know about the Lord. This kind of church you want to go to. They have very high up-tempo worship service. It's very progressive, almost like a concert when you go in. We have mega churches around like that right now. They do those things extremely well. It's the other side of the track that we have to look at and make sure we're doing well, not drawing them, keeping them, sustaining them, ministering to them. Now, when you get those kinds of numbers in a church, you can pretty much put ministries in place that support just about anything. And the reason you can do that with those numbers is very simple, because you have enough revenue to pay staff. And so you can pay full-time staff to come in And when you start paying folk, you can demand a certain product that comes out of it. You can demand excellence out of it. And that's what's going on. So you can have a ministry that's over the high school students. You can have a minister who's over the middle school students. You can have a minister who's over the nursery. You can have all those people in place because you have that much population to support it. It becomes a little bit different when you come down to smaller churches. Now, the average church in America, the average large church in America has about 600 members. That's the average large church, not mega church. Those are aberrations wherever you go. And people get that confused because you see churches on TV all the time with these ministries. What you won't see on TV is Saddleback, because that's not what Rick Warren was about. He didn't have a show. You won't see him going around doing a whole lot of preaching outside his church, because that's not what he was about. He was about teaching pastors. That's what he did in his conference that he has annually. At one point, it was 3,000 or 4,000 pastors annually would come into his conference to learn the methods. Of course, we've all seen that his book, one of his books, he's written about 5 books. The one book that we all know about is The Purpose Driven Church. And it was, of course, a bestseller, made him a very wealthy man, of which he has tithed a whole lot of the money that he got from it. He entered into a concept called reverse tithing, where he lived on 10% of his income and tithed the 90%. It's an interesting concept, if you can get that. He also got, you'll see in your write-up, was known for a very famous tax case because of the housing allowance that pastors get. And he was known as the pastor who almost messed up the housing allowance for a lot of pastors. I don't know if you guys remember, at every annual business meeting, there's a housing allowance you allocate toward me as pastor that I can deal with on my income taxes. And Rick Warren had the same thing, and the amount of his housing allowance and the fact that it ended up in court created a ripple in the community. But it all worked out when the IRS and the judge who were involved were overruled by Congress. Congress went in and reinstated the housing allowance after the judge said it was not fair. I said all that to say that Rick Warren is famous, but what's more important are the principles that we deal with when we come to church. What do people look for? What is it that they need to have? What's essential for us to have in order for us to be a God ordered or God foundational church? What do we have to have? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I want you to know this, that every church is different. The way some people do it may be different, doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because they do it different. The way we do it may be different, doesn't mean it's wrong. There are some things that come about because of personality of leadership, personality. And when I say personality of leadership, I don't simply mean personality of leadership of the pastor. That's also the rest of the leaders at the church as well. If you go to just about any church, you'll start seeing, depending on how long the leaders have been in place, you'll start seeing some of their personalities in the church service. It's just that simple. And so tonight we're going to look at what are the principles of a purpose-driven church. And we start out simply by asking the question, what do we do? What do we do right? What do we do well here? What is our church doing well? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. What do we do well in terms of in the building and outside the building? And then we can ask ourselves, what do we need to do better? What do we need to do better? How do we attract new members? How do we sustain the current members? Can you even survive if you don't attract new members? And of course, the answer is for a while. For a while. But how do you go about attracting those new members? What is it that they're looking for? What do we have to put in place? How much work has to be done? What do you think God had in mind when he started the church? What was the purpose of God starting the church. You know that the church is a God creation. It's not man-made. It's a God creation when done right. This institution that we come to call the church, it wasn't initially called the church. We were simply followers of Jesus Christ. They called it the way, and then it picked up negative connotations based on Jesus's popularity and reputation at the time. So, what did he have in mind when he started? When he started the church? Do the principles of this church line up with the principles that were originally expected in church? What's our mission? I'm asking all these questions because these are the things that we need to talk about and we need to discuss. Our mission statement. Our mission is to demonstrate God's love through a spirit-fed worship, spirit-led walk, and spirited witnessing. That's our mission statement. Our vision statement is we are a church family, humbled and transformed by the love of Christ, and we demonstrate his love by learning his ways, one, spreading his word, two, and sharing his blessings in our community and the world at large. Three-pronged approach. All right. We learn his ways, spread his word, and we share his blessing. Those three things we do. Do we know those things? Do we embody those things in all that we do? Do we infuse those things in every single thing that we operate under? Every ministry we have here should operate under those tenets. And the question is, do they? And whose responsibility is to check to make sure we're staying in line with that? I would suggest that it's everybody's responsibility to make sure we line up when we're spending funds that come in. Do the funds follow the missionary purpose of the church? Do people give with that in mind? Do they even know? These are things that are important when we're out telling people about the church. Are we explaining to them what we're all about? Because people want to know, well, what are y'all about at church? You see some churches that follow the seeker model that Rick Warren has established, and he wasn't the first one. Let me say this: he wasn't the first one to establish that. Willow Creek was doing it long before he was. Willow Creek is another mega church. A lot of these churches are controversial because they made a mistake, Tyrone, in mixing church and politics, and they let politics get involved in their ministries. And because of that, they have been, in some respects, put on hot seat. Rick Warren has been real careful to stay as apolitical as he can, making sure that he's not talking about Democrat, Republican, independent out there in California. That's a big deal. While we can't live in this country without in some way being impacted by politics in some way, we don't have to be political in our approach to things. And that's something we have to be vigilant about. And as close as my daily work is with politics, I believe y'all can attest, I've tried my best to keep politics out of this practice. I don't even let people come here and make campaign speeches. I didn't even do it when I was running for office. I don't think that's appropriate. There's some now people will disagree with me on it. I just don't know where you draw the line. If you let one come in, you got to let all of them come in, which means you got to let the ones you like and the ones you don't. I mean, the ones you're going to vote for and the ones you're not going to vote for, if you're going to be fair, because otherwise you're just telling the congregation one side of the story. And I don't know that that's fair. And I think that's what's happening everywhere. You and I know that there are congregations everywhere that wouldn't let somebody like me come in and talk to their congregation if I was running for office. And so I say, let's just cut all that. We're not going to have it. The best way I found to support candidates when I think they're necessary or needed in our community in a certain position is to tell you who I'm supporting. And if my recommendation means anything, then that'll tell you what you do. That's not telling you who to support. That's just telling you, I think this candidate is worthy of my support. And that's how I've approached that issue. And I got a lot of political friends, many of them, most of my colleagues are in politics, but I let them know how we operate. So let's look at these principles that have been identified as being necessary. Now, there is um, a generality to these principles that we're going to talk about. And if we were to, and I think we can probably, as an exercise at some point, not tonight, after we discuss these, line up our activities here and see how they fit with these principles. Okay. And what we'll do is probably put a little chart out with these principles, and then you can decide for yourself how well you think we're having. Because I believe this might need to be an ongoing discussion for us, not just tonight for this lesson, but an ongoing discussion, because I think ultimately it helps make us better. It helps make us stronger to identify some things that are going on. And so when we look at the first purpose that a church was created for, it can't ever, and it's not one of the core tenets. But I want to tell you this: I learned this from an old Baptist preacher. It's not in chronological order, but the purpose of any church is to worship. Worship. We don't have as our core purpose to worship, then we are struggling in while we're gathering in the first place. All right. And then we have to be careful in identifying who or what we're worshiping. Okay. Who or what we're worshiping. Now, one of the things that they did out in Saddleback that I thought was creative is all of these 5 tenets, they identified them with words that started with M. M. If I'm not mistaken, all of them start with M. And so in his church, he would call the church exists to magnify the name of the Lord. Magnification is glorifying God through a variety of means. How do we glorify God in our activities here at this church? What do we do to magnify the name of God? Is what we do our activities put God in the right light? Or do we do anything that diminishes the name of God? And that's one thing our leaders have to be vigilant on, and making sure that we don't do anything that harms the name of the Lord. Worship is not limited to Sunday morning. Worship also means when we are outside the sanctuary in our lives, in our activities, are we magnifying the name of the Lord by our reputations and our character? We can diminish who people think God is by how we behave. Our actions can diminish God. If we go around saying, I'm a believer, yes, I'm a believer, that's a song we sing. We sing that everywhere. We got it loud, and yet we are the ones who bring in the most mess everywhere we go. We're diminishing the name of the Lord. People start looking as if we're in some respects schizophrenic. You know, on one end, we are a Bible thumper. On the other, we're hiding the Bible behind our back. Nobody follows that. All right. It's not defined by music style. Worship. It's not. That's not worship. Just what's going on out there on that organ or on those instruments, that's part of a worship experience. But that alone is not worship. And I'm always struggling when I see people diminish a worship experience to just what's happening on the music. That's not it. It's a whole experience that we come into on a Sunday morning when we come. It's a whole life experience. Your whole life ought to be a worshipful experience. How you walk today. Reverend Beverly used to say all the time, I always call Reverend Beverly's name, but Reverend Beverly used to say all the time that if people were talking to you more than 10 minutes and couldn't tell you were a believer, something ain't right. Something ain't right. And he used to say that all the time. And I used to say, man, that is very conservative, you know. But the truth of the matter is, in your communication is all he was trying to say. The communication ought to tell people, because I can tell you this right now, if you talk to somebody long enough, you can tell when they're not a Christian. You can tell by what they say, how they talk, the words they use. And that's not to say we all say flowery and wonderful things all the time. I can tell you right now, I struggle with that sometimes. It is and it depends on the group you find yourself in too. So I've told you before, some of the worst conversations you want to hear come from a pastor's office, pastors' offices. When they get together, they just lose themselves sometimes and start talking ridiculously, which is why I always had so much respect for Clyde Beverly Sr. I didn't know him. I didn't know him when he was younger, but the man I knew older, he could tighten up a pastor's office just by walking in. People would be in there talking, not necessarily about anything that was horrible. They just wouldn't be talking about anything that was purposeful in there. All right. But when he walked in, everybody was almost as if the principal just came in the room. And people would, this not just young preachers, this was everybody tighten up. And I don't know if he knew he had that kind of reaction on people, but we all knew. That's simply the kind of person that he was. And when he walked into a room, he had the kind of gravitas, the kind of personality that would tell you that this man is about something. This man is a good man. That's the way he carries himself. And that's what we're talking about. Your life ought to be lived such that you're teaching a testimony by how you live. Just by how you live. Not that you're always giving. And so worship is going to be at the center of everything that we do around here. And that's where all Christian life begins and ends, in worship. All Christian life begins and ends in worship. Anything we do is supposed to be the worship. And I learned that hard way. I went to see Pastor. In fact, I'll be very transparent. I went to see Thomas Beaver's first sermon. I went to celebrate with him because his mother and I worked together over at the Star. And after he preached his initial sermon, they went around introducing visitors. And I was there and I stood up and I introduced myself. I had only recently started preaching myself. And not that came up, I just came as really his mama's co-worker. And when I introduced myself, I came tonight. I said I came tonight to support Thomas. I'm proud of him. And I don't know why Reverend Chappelle took that opportunity to teach a lesson, but he did. I'm glad he did. Well, it's in front of the whole congregation. After service, he said, well, brother, we're glad you came tonight. Thank God for it. But our first reason ever for coming to church is to worship. And I said, well, all right. I mean, ain't nothing to say at that point but sit down and shut up, because he said I gave him the opening for it. He told everybody, we sat down, we learned. Okay. But it made an indelible mark on me. He was right. He was right. The purpose that we come, it doesn't matter who's there, doesn't matter who's in the pulpit, doesn't matter who's singing or doing whatever job in there. The first reason we come to church, come to a worship experience, is to praise God. That's it. If we're coming short of that, then we have missed the mark on what we're supposed to be doing. And when we come to worship him, everything else typically will line up if we worship him appropriately. We won't pay attention to things that we shouldn't be paying attention to. We'll be dealing with the circumstances that we need to deal with. When we come to worship him, we'll present everything that we have to present in that service in a worshipful manner. That means I'm going to preach the best way I know how to preach that day. That means the choir's going to sing the best they can that day. Whether they had a rehearsal or not, they're going to still sing the best they can. The musician, whether he had rehearsal, going to play the best he can. The ushers are going to be as gracious as they can. Why? Because we're doing all of it for the glory of God. Worship is at our center, and that's important. So worship is the primary reason any church has to exist. And so the question becomes, when people come to 4-5, do they feel as if they've been in a worshipful experience? Do they feel as if that tenet and the purpose of the church has been met? And that's what we have to always be aware of. The next thing we got to know is church was created for fellowship. Fellowship, crucial to me. Anybody that's been involved in any of the leadership meetings around here know that I learned that fellowship is crucial to our involvement with one another. Fellowship is more important than business in church. All right. Fellowship is more important than business. People don't want to hear that. But if you don't have good fellowship in church, you can't have good business in church. Why? Because people don't trust you. People don't trust you. And if people don't trust you, then you're going to have foundational issues, and your foundation is cracked from the beginning. And so fellowship is important, a connection, an interaction with people. This is why in the Bible they say don't put novices in positions of leadership because they don't have trust yet. All right, people don't know them enough. Now, if it's family oriented, you still might not get the trust. I mean, that's why young pastors can't hardly pastor their own the church they grew up in. It's hard for them because there's some issues in life. I don't know that I'm ready to tell this young boy or this young person. I don't know that I am because I don't know, even though they're my cousin or my brother or my grandson. Still, I don't know if they can give me the advice I need under these circumstances, and so it's a trust issue. So that's greatest danger I had when I came here. Greatest victory, danger was one, I was accepted by the seniors when I came in. They talked to me, some, not all, but there's enough trust transferred to me. Call me pastor. First experience I had when I came in, Eva Johnson's sister was ill when I first started. She was ill. Kimberly's mom, Kimberly Spate's mom. And she was at the Johnson's house. She was gravely ill. And I got a call that said, she's near the end. You need to come over here. Well, now I'm brand new. This is a new experience for me. I'm nervous because I don't know what to say. Don't know, honestly, what to do. But this is this is an only job training job. Okay. Ain't no book that say now go do this. Don't say the Bible because that's not it. So I go to the Johnson's house and you can imagine the scene is somber because she's sick in there. And I knew the Johnsons from First Baptist East Balls because Reverend Johnson and Reverend Beverly were friends. I didn't really know Miss Johnson that well, but we met then. And I went in the bedroom where she was, and Miss Johnson leaned in and said, touched her sister. She said, you up? You wait? And she raised her head. She said, the new pastor 45th Street is here to see you. And I walked in and she looked at me and she said, my Lord, now I can go home. I said, oh my God. Huh. If the Lord wanted to put an exclamation point on how significant this role was in somebody's life, I don't know that he could have made a more definite point in my life. When I walked in that bedroom, this woman said, now I can go home. Because I walked in the room, not as Andre, I went, but as the pastor of her church. I don't know if it had been weighing on her that there was no pastor at the time, while she was ill. Because if you grew up in church, that matters to you, whether there's somebody in leadership in the church. That matters whether somebody's going to be there if you know about spiritual leadership. But we visited for a few minutes. I was only there a few minutes. We visited for a few minutes. I shared with her, I prayed with her, and then I left. And the next day, she went home. Serious matter. This is a serious matter. Fellowship. Now, I often wonder if I had been too busy to go over that when they called. And sometimes I am. Sometimes I am. I was driving home from a vacation, Florida, when I got a call from Miss Johnson, told me Deacon Johnson, Andrew Johnson, who was my friend, that he was at, you know, he was at that place. And I told him I'm not gonna make it because I was in Florida. I mean, it was just geographically, there's no way I could be there. Didn't make it. Didn't make it, but that was okay. They had enough fellowship beforehand. They understood because you can't be everywhere at the same time. But the pull on you emotionally is a lot. Fellowship is important. You cannot shepherd a congregation. Oh, preacher say you can't be a shepherd and not smell like your sheep. Hmm. All right. You can't do it from remote control. It's not a virtual thing. You have to get among them. And when you're among them, the scent is going to rub off on you. And you cannot shepherd people, deal with people without being emotionally involved with them. You got to love people. And sheep bite. Sheep bite. Sheep look real docile, but they're not. They bite. They bite each other. And they bite you when you're trying to help them. You're trying to put some salve on them or some ointment because they've been in the thorn bushes. They bite you. And that's how it is in life. People get stuck in the briars of life and you're trying to pull them out and help them, and they bite. They snap at you. I'm not telling you what I heard. I'm telling you what I know. I've seen, not just me, I've seen other preachers get chewed up by their congregation trying to help them. The fellowship is crucial. It's so essential. The Greek word for fellowship is koinonia. If you don't know it, that's the fellowship we have around here with our young folk. We've had it for a while. We bring in other congregations of young folk and we celebrate with them. That's all it is fellowship, getting to know them. I think that's essential. Simply means partner in Greek. Partner, you're my partner in this. We all fellows. We all fellows in the same ship. All right. Which means we're going in the same direction. We generally are. Yeah. Paul wrote about this in a whole lot of places, talked about we have to all be together in spreading the gospel. Believers are in partnership. We are in partnership with Christ in his glory, in his grace, and in this part we don't hear, in his suffering. Partners with him. We're partners with him. What do you ask him? Can you drink this cup? Can you drink this cup? Because everybody want to go to Christ and be in glory with him. But then he said to them, can you drink this cup, this bitter cup? Can you do it? All right. Fellowship is much richer than a meal in the fellowship hall. That's good. Having a dinner here. That's good, but that's not what fellowship is all about. We reduce things to their most common denominator when we say we're gonna have a fellowship meal. The meal is not the focus. It's our communication and our getting together. That's the focus. The meal is simply a means to an end. So not only do we have worship at our center, we got fellowship at our that's essential to us having an effective church ministry. If we're doing fellowship well, and churches that do fellowship well, typically have healthy churches. I can't tell you the Sunday, I was shortly after I got here, that I was in the pulpit. We had, and I stood up and I said, I don't know what kind of church with the flavor we're going to have here. I'm trying to say flavor at the time. And I said, we might not be the richest, something to this effect. We might not have the most of this, but I said, but we can be the friendliest church. And it was not something that God just, I didn't have no epiphany when I woke up one morning. It just said, we can be the friendliest church and we can be friendly from the parking lot to the pulpit. That's where that came from. Just off the cuff like that. It wasn't something I planned or anything like that, but it's become an identifier of friendliness. And believe it or not, people, when they come here, a lot of people we invite, and we've invited a lot of people, they come in and they lean in and they say, y'all really are friendly when you come here. They say that because we can be what we want, we can be who we say we are. But I've also had people tell me that y'all not that friendly sometimes. And I'm glad they told me. I'm glad they told me. Now, I have to put all of it in perspective. Okay. Who I'm talking to, always consider the source. Because in order for us to be the friendliest church, we have to be friendly ourselves. Everybody has to be friendly. And if you got 100 people in the congregation and 2 of them aren't friendly, but the person who comes to the church sitting next to them too, then from their perspective, you're not friendly. All right. It doesn't matter what the other 98 did that day. They could have been just as gracious and wonderful. But if the 2 next to you are grumbling and grumpy, guess what? You're not friendly. So our reputation is not just from the pulpit, all right, not just the choir, not just the ushers or the people in the parking lot. It's every single member has to embody that. And that becomes our personalities. Fellowship is important. One of the things I've tried to infuse in fellowship is the ministries. Every one of them is supposed to have a fellowship gathering annually. Supposed to be able to do something because it's hard getting to know people in meetings. It's hard. You know, we get in meetings and we take care of the business. And then we get up and run up out of here. We don't really lately don't want to stay and do that much too long. But when you have fellowship gatherings, when you get invited to somebody's house, and it wasn't unusual for preachers to get invited to houses. Now that wasn't unusual. Huh? That was a thing for real when I first started. I often get invited to people's house. They get invited and they put it all out for you. You can tell when they real comfortable about you because sometimes when they invite you, they bring the preacher food out. You know, that's maybe some chicken or something like that. But when they real comfortable, they bring pig feet out and everything. That's when they all right with you. You know, they fry some fish in the back, and I'm talking about they bring it to you when it's hot. I mean, that's happened too. And either way, it's great. It's fellowship. We sit around and we talk and we have a good time, and I get to know you in a different way, a way different than we learn here. It's essential, and it's hard. It's hard. Time doesn't always allow us to do that. Preachers don't always want to get to know folk at weddings. Certainly not at funerals. That's when I know normally meet family members. Sometimes I just want to sit back at the barbecue and watch you interact with your folks, see your cousins and see them. Meet your cousins from out of town on those happy days, not when everybody's suited up. That's how you get to know people. And that's happened on a few occasions, been invited up to those kind of things. And I tell young preachers all the time, go as much stuff as you can. But then the sections of life of a pastor become very, very difficult, particularly in the setting that we've established in our community, where most pastors, the majority of them, 85% of them are bivocational pastors, which means they got to work another job, and do the church work as well. And it becomes a balance of that, particularly depending on how much their other job pulls on them. I've been fortunate, glory be to God, that I've had a job that allows me freedom of movement in a lot of respects that other people might not have. Like during the day, I can kind of maneuver my time during the day. If I need to be off, I can be. There's some people who don't have that. They can't get off. They get off, that's taking money out of their house, you know that. And I haven't had that situation. And so, but all of that is part of fellowship. And when I tell people, like when we have funerals, and I say, well, now, a weekday is going to be hard. Okay. They think I'm telling them necessarily for me. If I can't do it that day, I'm just going to flat out tell you I can't do it that day because I got such and such going on. But I'm talking about for the rest of the congregation, it's going to affect the fellowship. And your mama, your dad, or whoever it is had more depth in this conversation, in this congregation, than a weekday funeral will show. Because people just can't come, not because they don't love your folk, because they can't take off work. And so when you put them in a bad situation when you do that, but talking to people under those emotional circumstances is difficult. They want what they want, and you have to be quiet. But we try to give them guidance. Fellowship from beginning to end is important. And we try to make sure that's identified. Not only is worship essential, fellowship essential, discipleship. We're talking about right now. Discipleship is crucial to church growth. That's why we're in this series right now on discipleship. That's why we're talking about discipleship, because it's the flavor of tomorrow. And guess what? When we're discipling people right now, they're not going to look like everybody that's here now, because this church today doesn't look like it looked 50 years ago. It's changed. The iterations of the church, you're right, 10 years ago it's changed. 20 years from when I started. I was looking at some pictures today of when I got here 20 years ago, and just the physical layout of the church. The kids who are graduating from college now were babies in the pictures I was looking at. It's changed, and it's gonna change moving forward. And we're increasingly discipling people who do not have a foundation in church. So they have not been church. They don't know how you're supposed to behave, supposedly in a church, that you stand up at certain points, that you need to read the Bible. They don't know all those things. We have to teach them that. I grew up with a card in my hand in the Sunday school class. I grew up with a Bible verse. We all kind of had that connection. But there's a whole lot of people out there who've never been discipled at any point. Many of us were discipled for this walk from home. Regardless of the denomination you were in, you were discipled knowing that there was prayer, there was somebody you were looking up to, you had to respect elders, all of that. No, we got a whole different generation now. And so how do you put the programs in place and the position and the processes in place to support people like that? Well, the way we do it is we let kids come in without respecting their membership status. That's important. So we've always said, we want young folk to come. We want them to be around the church so we can teach them, so we can help them. They don't have to be members of the church to participate in the activities that we have. The choir, the motions ministries, they don't have to be members of the church. And it's worked, because when I look back at those pictures of all those kids who were involved, they all still involved in church as adults now. They might not be in this community. When they come back, they visit us. Typically, you don't go visit somebody that don't make you feel good. So when they come home, they still come in here. I noticed this Sunday, one of the ones who was very, very, he was one of the teenagers when I first got here. It's Joseph Murkison. Was here Sunday. He's grown, getting married this summer, what happened for him. But every time he and his siblings come home, he and the twins come home, not only do they come to church, every single time, I notice at the end of service, you know how I'm always locked up with somebody talking. Joseph waited. He waited until everybody else was gone, just so he and I could have a conversation. And that might not mean anything to y'all, but it meant so much to me that he was willing to stand there. That he wasn't trying to just come in here to punch a ticket. He legitimately came to fellowship with us. He really wanted to know what's going on, and we had a great conversation. Of course, I knew he was getting married, and so we talked about that for a while. I knew he was here to support his mama, who just had knee surgery. All of these things, this depth of knowledge helps, but it's only because we communicate and we have fellowship. So that's how we grow people in the church. Who doesn't want a connection to something like that? Who doesn't want to be a part of an organization that misses you when you're out there, that supports you when you're struggling? That's all we're trying to relate to people, that we can be that kind of home for you, spiritual home for you. But it's going to take more than just me. It's going to take everybody doing it. I'm not saying I'm the only one. People come to this congregation because of the congregation. Sheep make sheep. That's how it is. And when I look at the people who've come to the church lately, I bet I can point to the connection they have in terms of friendship or family that's brought them into the church. And that's how you grow a church congregation. It doesn't matter how small or big it is. Family brings family, friends bring friends, because you bring the church that you see. Now, we also got to be open enough to bring people who don't look like us, who don't act like us, who are struggling. And if we're open enough, and we really are the friendliest church from the parking lot to the pulpit, then we'll be attracted to those folks, because they'll say, even though I didn't have no family there, even though I didn't have no friends there, it felt like home. It felt okay to me because people embraced me. And we're teaching them about the Lord. So not only are we making disciples, our core issue is to make a disciple who can also make another disciple. All right. Not just draw them, but they can draw somebody else. We also have to have service. That leads right into that service to the community. We got to help people who can't help themselves. Poor, you will always have among you. Jesus Christ said that. The poor, you will always have among you. Some of us we've been in both categories. We've been needing help, and the Lord has blessed us so that we can help folks. And if that's the case, then we ought to have enough empathy for those people who don't have. The poor, you will always have among you. And so we shouldn't be complaining about helping folk, whatever their circumstances are. What we got to do is figure out how to be the best stewards of what God has given us so we can help with the most impactful way. There's so much need that there's no way we can help everybody, but we can help somebody. All right, we can help somebody. We just got to decide how we're going to help them. And we got to communicate that, because some of us know situations better than others. And we got to be very communicative about what we're trying to do. And it's a whole church obligation to help like that. And we'll see that as we have our service day later this summer. We're going to have a day of service. It's going to be on a Sunday, because I believe service is worship as well. We ought to operate in that vein. And so we'll come in one Sunday, we'll take care of whatever necessary we have to take care of, which has become even better with some of the technology. And then we're going to help people. We're going to help people. Now, one of the problems with helping people on Sunday is that a lot of places we might go to help them isn't open on Sundays. And so we got to figure out how we're going to do that the best way. But service has to be a part of what we do to help people. And I believe that's a whole congregation thing. And then last but not least, evangelism is ministry done outside the local church, all right, with the intent of leading people into faith with Christ, not necessarily membership here. If they come here, that's fine. We love it. Please come be part of our congregation. Please do it. All right. All right. Please do it. But that's not our core reason for doing it. We want them to know Christ and Him as their Savior. And so I know tonight you've been looking at your outline and it's got 2 or 3 teaching points on it. And I know that you want me to say, and I'm going to do that as we get along, but I wanted to lay this foundation for what the principles are of a purpose-driven church. All right. I told you the answers to all of them. I just didn't tell them to you in order tonight. All right. We got to give people, what do great commandment Christians do? We give other people what it feels like to be a part of God's family. We teach them that. That's our job. We teach people what it's like to be in God's family. That's what we do. All right. That's how we do. We tell them that's our purpose. Go ye therefore is us going and teaching people how to be a part of God's family. And we do it by using those 5 principles that I just talked to you about. And then what do Great Commission churches do? Generally, we get our marching orders from the Lord, and we establish ministries. We produce ministries that support people where they are. That means some of them are hurting, so we try to give them something to alleviate the hurting. And some people are lonely, so we try to fill that space with them. Some people are still growing and they're in their formative years, and so we create ministries to support them so that they can grow in a healthy and positive way. That's what New Testament churches do. The first century church, the one that we talk about in Acts, specifically, they fellowship from house to house. So all these principles that came out really came out of the activity that they showed us. They learned how to support one another and whatever. Remember now, in the first century, in that first church, there was slave owner. There was so many different people in those spaces that they had to have these principles in order to be successful. And so, how they operated is the recipe that we're following. And so, are we a Great Commission church? I would say we are. Are we perfect in what we do? I would say we are not. We're struggling in some areas. There's some things we could do better, but all of it stems from commitment at every level. All right. Some jobs are for the whole church, some jobs are for individuals, but everybody's got something to do. Warren's principles are biblical. That's why I talked about them tonight. If they were not biblical, then we wouldn't be talking about it. One of my first big Bible studies that I did here was utilizing Rick Warren's orientation, the name of his foundation. It was great. I love that Bible study. I tell every new pastor I know to teach foundations, talks about what's the Bible, who is Jesus, who is God, why do we study the Bible? Why is it the authority? And every now and then, I don't know how many times, I think I've taught it twice since I've been in these 20 years. Every now and then, it seems like I got to go back and pull it out again because we need to be reminded of all these principles and we need to teach new believers these things too. They want to know why everybody read the Bible and how is the Bible the Bible? Well, there are answers for that. We ought to be able to talk about it and tell people why God, who is God? Who is Jesus? How do we know Jesus is this? How do we know God is this? Those are reasonable questions that we have to be able to answer. And we have to be able to answer them without being offended or anything. We got to just be able to talk to folk about it. That's where we are. That's where we're starting in this Bible study. How are we the church? Why are we the church? These principles are important. All right. Those are the 5 principles I went through tonight of a purpose-driven church. Next time we get together, we're going to talk about faithfulness. Faithfulness, which is the bedrock of a church being successful. Take that outline on the purpose-driven church, and when you have a little time, read it. I think you'll find it very, very informative. Very, very informative. Rick has done nothing but help people. He just got into a big argument with Southern Baptists. Really, really, really big argument with Southern Baptists. And I'm not certain he pulled himself out because Saddleback is a Southern Baptist church, even though he's in California. Got a big argument. Whether you agree with him or not, he stood toe to toe with him. He told him he wasn't backing down. So, and it was over the issue of women preachers. That was the core issue. Women leaders in the church, basically. All right, that's where we are. I know I started out with a whole lot. It invigorated me. Any questions or comments? Thank y'all so much. I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged. I am encouraged. Yeah. Do you have any prayer requests before we leave tonight?
My uncle Harold Hall, my dad's brother, he'll be in the hospital 3 or 4 more days, but he's doing good. He's in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay. I didn't know he was in the hospital, but thank you for telling us. Has he been there for a while? Oh, y'all didn't know he was in there either. Well, God bless. Is it Harold Hall?
That's
Amen. Well, let's keep Brother Harold Hall in prayer. Thank you for telling us that. All right.
A niece, a great niece in Chicago, she's 25 years old.
Oh my.
She had lupus.
Oh man. Lord have mercy. We'll certainly be in prayer for.
Holly family.
Say it again.
Holly.
The Holly family, the Hall family, and the Holly family. Amen. Well, God bless y'all tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you next time on 45 Minutes of Purpose. I know it was more than 45 minutes, but I owe you some.